Welcome to Intermission, a theater podcast where we talk to theater people about anything except theater. My name is Marcus E. McQuirter. I'm the host, and I am joined today by two fantastic people, poet and wordsmith Prudence Arcenaux, and legendary actor, director, man of the stage, Jamie Rogers. Thank you all for joining me.
Of course.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having us.
So the rules of this podcast are we talk to theater people about anything but theater. Prudence, I don't know if you're a theater person, if you consider yourself, we will certainly adopt you.
I like movies.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Sweet. But we're not going to talk about any of that. We're going to talk about something better. We're going to talk about Star Trek, because we love Trek. We love Trek. It was interesting because we had some water cooler conversations, even though we don't have a water cooler in our faculty suite, about, and I didn't know this, that you all watch Star Trek. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh my God, you work right here and you watch Star Trek. It's amazing. And then we'd all been watching the newest iteration of kind of Trek TV universe, Discovery, Picard, and Strange New Worlds. And that episode 2 of Strange New Worlds that came out this summer, I can never remember the name. Astra per Sparrow.
Yeah.
Okay. And it follows in this tradition of it really is a tradition in Trek TV, this idea of the courtroom drama. There's a ton of stuff to unpack in this episode, but the fact that it uses this format that is so familiar across the different franchises is really interesting. Mm-hmm. What did y'all think of the episode?
First, I need to know, before we really get into this, whose ship are you on?
Oh.
Like if we're talking about this, it's important to understand where you're coming from as you're thinking about this kind of court thing. For me, it's Voyager. That's the ship I'm on. Yeah. And I think it's important because if we're talking about Prime Directive, those kinds of things, Voyager takes us out of this safe space. What does the Prime Directive mean if we're just talking about survival? Every day, just survival, right? And in the beginning, there's no sense of this stuff is going to get back. If we're this far away from what is home and what is considered the good and the rule, do we have to follow it? And what does it mean when we break it, right? So then when we come to this court case in this modern show, talking about this idea of how it's bent and how it's twisted, and how it's used however you want it to, just to make it work for you. I'm consistently brought back to that ship far, far away, right? And what's the worth of the Prime Directive if we're not looking at the good in people and we're not looking at what it means to truly live in those days?
My ship is Enterprise D. I'm my entry into Star Trek was Next Generation, Captain Picard, who definitely violated the Prime Directive multiple times. But I think that, to go back to your initial question, I think what was really good about this particular episode was that, of course, we've had some new Trek, but they've been very into serialization of these long story arcs that happen over one season. And Star Trek Strange New Worlds is definitely more of an episodic approach back to those original those 90s shows like Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine. So for me, the standalone court episode for me really just brought me back to the great court episodes of Enterprise D. Right. Where, and what I really liked about those episodes was that it was always about, was Starfleet actually living up to its own ideals? Yeah. Wow. That I think in the first season of Next Generation, you thought, Starfleet was the best organization ever. And then all of a sudden there's these court episodes where well, maybe this doesn't apply to this race or this group of people over here. And just really questioning that Starfleet idealism in the future, just like how we question our own democratic systems, So I think that I was immediately recalled to Measure of a Man in the second season of Next Generation for that.
Drumhead was in.
I just remembered Next Generation it's bookended by Q, right? Like Q judges them at the start,
series,
and then the end comes back and does so it is courtroom drama the entire time.
Through and through.
Yeah.
Through and through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whose ship are you on?
Defiant. Definitely Defiant.
Okay.
That's a tough little bulldog of a ship. I love that ship. And for me, one of the reasons I love Deep Space Nine is it's a similar thing. We start to interrogate what are the principles that we live by, and when we are pressed to the wall, do we live? And I love DS9 because, I mean, Cisco did some questionable court-martialable.
Yeah.
Bombed a planet just to make a point. It's like, what? Which is something you do see across the series, that these captains and these leaders really have to wrestle with principles. And is the principle more important than human?
Yeah.
Than sentient life.
Yeah.
One of the we were talking earlier about this Latin phrase, which means, what does it actually mean? It means something pretty cool. I have to look at my note cards.
To the stars.
To the stars.
Yeah, through adversity to the stars, or through hardship to the stars. It's really interesting, especially in the context of the Strange New Worlds episode, where they're hearkening back to, in Trek history. So read your Trek history. The eugenics wars, right? So we're talking about genetic manipulation in these eugenics wars that nearly destroyed humanity. And now we're revisiting it hundreds of years later and seeing, do those principles still apply? How do they apply to individuals and individual rights? Prudence, you had mentioned in our previous communication talking about something that was not strictly a courtroom drama episode, but this whole the storyline that circulates around Seven of Nine and Borg children and Q and how we see them as human beings. Yeah. Why did you connect that to this particular episode?
Well, I was intrigued by this idea of the fear that everyone has. I mean, like when we're talking about science fiction shows, we're always looking at what those shows are actually showing us kind of in our modern world. Like I'm thinking Battlestar Galactica, right? And that kind of parallel that was running with the political that was happening then. And now we're looking at the idea of Una's case in terms of what's happening on the border, right? When we're thinking about the war in Ukraine, like all of these things that are happening, right? Like who belongs, who's here. But really it was about worth. And it was kind of an interesting thing for me because when I was thinking about Seven, it was as if they tossed her aside because she was older. Like the young children had a chance. Like you could find a way to reshape them as humans, but because she was older, it seemed like she was still so closely connected to the Borg, even though she'd been disconnected, even though they'd changed her, even though she'd said, no, I'm here to try and understand this thing. It seemed like she was a lost cause. Like there was so much fear connected to her, which is why I was so happy when she showed up in Picard. Yeah. Right. And that she seemed to be this actualized person instead of kind of a foster robot for the Borg children. Right. Because Hugh and Icheb, like they were treated like something that could be planted and regrown. And it didn't seem to be that way with Seven.
And when we pick up her story, she's not in Starfleet.
Yeah.
She's no longer part of Starfleet. She's in the Fennis Rangers, you know, helping, dislocated people, former drones. And trying to give them voice. Only throughout Picard's seasons does she finally come back to Starfleet. But now she's captain.
But
it's
only captain because all of these other horrible things happen, not because they recognized her actual worth and said, we want to promote you and put you in those spaces. It was just, well, look at nobody else.
Despite she's like a genius. She's an absolute engineering genius. It's interesting. And it connects to one of the episodes that you were talking about earlier in our communication from Next Generation, right? Measure of a Man. I mean, it's like right there in the title.
I mean, that's like probably up there as far as courtroom Star Trek episodes, I think. I remember watching, I was probably in 8th grade when the second season was there. And I think it just played with my expectations of what I believed to be the character of Data, I guess. I just remember when the Admiral and Max come onto the bridge and they're like, he wants to work on your machine. Mm-hmm. And that he was always viewed as a machine by Starfleet, or always viewed as property. As it. Mm-hmm. And I had fallen in love with that character for a year and a half. And I was like, what are they talking about? Yeah. So I saw a lot of similarities with Una and Data, as far as, losing a family member, losing a part of your crew because of Starfleet views them as, I think what Guinan mentions in Measure of Man, as disposable people. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, this race is over here. Yeah. Maybe is not part of the Federation for whatever reason. Yeah. And Measure of Man is such a great episode. Because I love it because there's a lot of things that begin in that episode as far as continuity within the seasons and stuff. I always like it when Star Trek sort of leans into revisiting the well a little bit. So like, that's the first episode that has the poker scene in the beginning. Really? Yeah, it's the first episode that starts off with poker, and that poker theme continues out the whole entire season. It's actually like Picard and Guinan's like first scene sitting down as friends, and we see their relationship, because the only times before we see Guinan is in The Child and Outrageous Okana, where she's taking care of Wesley, or she's taking care of Data, learning how to be funny. Yeah. So that's the first time we see Picard and Guinan's relationship there. Yeah. It's also the first time that we see Data's connection with the Natasha Yar's memorial thing, and that is continually brought back throughout the series. So I feel like a lot of things begin in that episode as well, which is why it's one of my favorites.
It's interesting how like each of the franchises kind of, in some way, shape, or form, while it's an ensemble, there's usually one character, and we're watching them on this quest to discover their humanity, whether they're, and I don't know if that's racist or not to say discover their humanity, but, to discover their worth as a person. Yeah. Whether it's Data or it's 7 of 9. To an extent, I think Odo in Deep Space Nine serves that.
The Doctor on Voyager.
On Voyager. Mm-hmm. And it for some, and which another good courtroom episode. Author, yeah. Which is kind of comedic, but I think that was a really fun and interesting. Like, I just watched Discovery, But to Connect last night, which is also about this question of AI and are you a person and what is sentience and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But Author was a great episode. Mm-hmm. What's that actor's name that plays the Doctor? Robert Picardo. Yeah. Oh man, the guy's good.
And it's this really interesting thing about this underlying concern about if you aren't considered human, because I'm going to go with that. Mm-hmm. Even though we're talking about Starfleet and the Federation, like, we're still looking at it through a humanoid lens, right? So like, you have to fit those parameters. If you don't fit those parameters, then what are you? Mm-hmm. Right? And it seems like then you are disposable. It seems like you are then a workforce. Like, because I think about the Doctor from Voyager, all of the other doctors that were made that didn't work because of his bad personality and his original programming are slaving away in a mine. Right? Yeah. So like, if you aren't considered human, as we hear from Una's experience, right? Like, you are relegated to this lesser space, right? These refugee camps, like, you don't have the option to further yourself in this space. Right. And that then creates more fear because you're set aside. Right. And so then no one ever gets an opportunity to find out more about you. Like, yes, you could make another Data, as Maddox says. Like, can you imagine a Data on every ship? Okay, so you're making a slave race of androids for the sole purpose of just making us feel better because we're not as smart and we're not as fast as those things. Like, that doesn't seem like we're following what the Federation's supposed to be doing.
And that artificial intelligence in Picard may have had it right. It's like, don't trust these biologicals. Yeah. Yeah, that's good stuff. it made me think about like in Next Generation. I think it's really interesting. So red alert, we're going to talk about making art, right? But as creators ourselves, I'm always looking at production and what's happening in production. I think it's really interesting that in Measure of a Man, for instance, that it is Guinan, a Black woman, the actor who is a Black woman, who raises this question. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's something I observe and note. It's like, it wasn't Riker, it wasn't anybody else who raises this point to Picard. Yeah. It was Whoopi Goldberg's character of Guinan.
Yeah.
And we were talking about casting earlier, which is really huge.
Yeah.
It's really important question in these productions.
I mean, for me, it was as a child raised on Roots, seeing LeVar Burton and knowing his character in this kind of slave story, that's where my brain was in the show already, right? And so then Guinan shows up and she talks about her people and how our people had been assimilated, how our people had been used, how their bodies, so that was always there for me when I was watching that. And that was an easier way for me to get into this discussion about who we see as human and who we see as person, as having rights. It was much safer for me than Roots, right? Much safer than the terror of watching that miniseries, to go into this world that the suggestion was we're trying to be better, right? But then to still see over and over again, we're falling into the same traps. Like we can't seem to escape it because of this thing, right? And so we're trying to figure out what that thing is that makes us keep going back to this space.
And this idea of what I think comes out in this episode 2 of Strange New Worlds, I thought it was really interesting that something that Una's lawyer says about you can hide it, like you can pass. You've got these genetic manipulations, and not all of us have them that they can be hidden. So some of us just walk around and cannot mask this fact. Yeah, and it applies to It just conjures up this understanding of race, of gender, of sexuality, of what are all the things that we are as people that we have to cover up in order to advance in this organization or in this society.
Yeah. And just because you have a law does not necessarily mean that law is just.
Exactly.
Yes. Right? Yeah. Which is huge.
Yeah. And it's that idea of the actress, the Black woman, looking at this other actress, white woman, like, I can't hide skin. I can't hide this other thing. And that it's the parents who did, like, I had no control, right? Yeah. The parents did this. So whatever the things that are happening to me as I exist now, like, that was a parental decision. Like, had you asked me, sure, I might have said no because of this thing that I wanted to do, but it is who I am. I can't not be this thing.
I can't remove that.
Yeah, I can't take it off. I think that's what I was talking with you about right after I saw the episode, was that I like that the lawyer was the Black woman saying, like, some of us can't hide these things. Like, we all have to walk through the world, and there are going to be those ideas that people come to you immediately with. They've already checked off boxes, right? And you, my friend, get to pass in so many different ways. Yeah. So I can do your case, but I just need to remind you, things are much easier for you. And even as they end that episode, right? Like, the lawyer says, I'm still not cool with Starfleet. Yeah. I see a bunch of people who are trying, but everybody's going to try harder.
Right.
This is a small step.
Yeah, like, energize, get me out of here. Yeah.
Get me out of here. Yep.
Boy, heard that last monologue, though, of hers in that courtroom scene.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
I want to memorize Picard's monologue from Drumhead, that final speech when he's just like, look, let me break this down.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That's why I keep telling my acting students, like, study Shakespeare, study the classics. You don't have to do Shakespeare. But if you want to do any kind of science fiction or fantasy roles, this is the this is the gravitas you need to have to be able to put these things on.
And Patrick Stewart has that as Picard. I mean, I think that's why growing up, I really loved Enterprise D, but mostly was because, well, I didn't really have a father figure. And so I think I connected Picard as somewhat of a father substitute as far as what is expected. You know, you do things on time. You are your word.
Yeah.
All those kind of things. But he is just also an incredible actor. He almost demands that kind of respect and gravitas from his whole entire crew. You know, they're not like Strange New Worlds. Well, you know, he's not making eggs in the kitchen, you know, and having Friday night dinners and stuff. You know, he doesn't even join them probably into the last episode of that poker. Yeah, for All Good Things.
Yeah.
First Duty, is that the one with
Wesley Crusher?
Oh man.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Wesley.
He's a controversial figure.
I mean, let's talk about Wesley. I mean, I think it's interesting and ironic that you say that you saw him as a father figure, considering that his character is written as someone who avoids the children, even though he's got a ship that has family on it. Like, it is the thing that he backs away from again and again. But all of the characters, Wesley included, like, they look to him as... like what would happen. And even those times when he's not there, it's Picard's ship. Yeah. Like, this is his home, and whatever rules he set in place, like this is how we live this world. Yep. Yeah. But fine. What were you gonna say about Wesley?
It's that episode. And me thinking of what you just said. That moment when he confronts Wesley, I was like, can we cuss on it? Oh shit. That hurts. Yeah.
Are you gonna tell them or am I?
Yeah.
Like, you don't even have a choice.
Yeah. Just like, ooh, I need to write that down on my parenting book.
Yeah.
There you go. To compel. Yeah, another really good episode, I think, with the not Tom Paris.
The Tom Paris before Tom Paris, right?
Even though that character is the
same actor.
That's who shows up in Woody.
Yeah.
He just changed his name. Another interesting take on the trial episode. An episode I really like from Voyager is the one where they meet the what they call the Saurians, the dinosaur people who come from Earth, evolve. First Descent, I think is what it's called. The premise being that both these humans and these sentient dinosaur people are from Earth, and they put evolution on trial.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Great episode. Great episode. What are others that really stand out for y'all as trial episodes?
I think some of what happens on Disco when they've got the creature that allows them to do the jumps.
Oh, the
like
the mycelial.
And the sense of like how it responds when they're doing these things, and they're trying to decide like if this is what we want to do, if we want to keep moving forward in this space. But also there's now I'm going to blank on it. The Deer Hunter actor, he's a captain. They've got they're the flying
Equinox. So
the flying creatures that they can put in the canisters, but they're
getting home by using them.
Yeah, like there's something about this sense of where we're drawing the line for sentience.
Yeah.
Right. And again, it goes back to worth. Like, your worth is in powering the ship. Doesn't matter if I can hear you screaming when I do this process. It doesn't matter if I see you die when I do this process. You make the ship faster. So we're going to keep going. Right. And so, like, who's going to stop and say, this is wrong? Right. Like, if we're here to make contact, we have to acknowledge the contact of everything. And I'm not always thinking of the very specific, like, here it's a more formal space and there's someone who's coming in and who's going to make a grander speech. I think for me, it's the smaller moments, right, where we live the courtroom very quickly. Like, these horrible, horrible things are happening. I am on trial as a being, right? And how am I going to react to this other being? Am I being fair and good? Or am I being self-serving? Which, again, I think Starfleet does, and then masks it in many ways.
Picard's speech in Measure of a Man, you know, where the Federation was founded to seek out new life. While there he sits waiting. Like, and I also was thinking of the exocomps in Quality of Life, where they had this little exocomps to go in to fix the things, and they're just like, it's a canary in a mine kind of thing, but no one comes to their defense until Data does.
Such good stuff. Okay. Here's a question for you. So we know which ship we're each going to be on. But if you had to have a drink with one character either in Quarks or in 10 Forward, who would you have a drink with? Like a long drink, not like, hey, how's it going? This is like, we're gonna set this bottle here and we're gonna talk.
Are they existing in the world of these, or I'm just picking them up from wherever I'm putting them
into their world?
Okay, I think I'm understanding your thing. So they have to exist in a world where 10 Forward exists, and they have to exist in a world where Quarks exists. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Well, that's going to take me a little bit longer.
I think I'd like to have a drink with Anson Mount, Captain Pike.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very, very, seems like a very relatable kind of guy, you know? But again, probably if I have to keep it to Enterprise D, it may be Worf and I with some prune juice.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I'd have a Ractigino with Dax, just because the idea of living several lifetimes is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And there's still a Dax out there.
There's still a Dax out there.
Mm-hmm.
No pressure, Prudence.
Yeah, it's hard because, I mean, the character that I identify the most with is B'Elanna Torres. So, like, that's my space. I think I would probably want to sit down with Guinan.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by her longevity, because they've done that with the character in Strange New Worlds.
With the Carol Kane character.
Yeah. So I'm intrigued by that, by carrying that loss for so long.
Yeah.
Right. And those episodes when she doesn't appear, I think I'm more intrigued by that. Like, where is she? What does she do in her time off? What's her room like? Like, what's this like? And I also wonder, like, is it just that she lives longer, or does she have some other power? Does she have some other innate thing that we're not like? So I'm intrigued by that. I don't think she'd share it with me, but I'd be more than willing to sit there. And I also like the idea that I could drink as much as I want to and not get drunk. So just keep lining them up, and I'll keep trying them. Yeah, I understand many people are disappointed by that, but it would be like a good space to be in. Like, here, show me how you hone in on people, right? Show me how you listen, how you do that thing that you do.
Race of listeners, right?
Yeah.
All good things must come to an end, yeah? And our discussion of the track will have to go on pause. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
We just got started. Yeah. Here we are. But thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your collectibles. These aren't toys.
No.
Collectibles.
Yes.
These are investments in fandom.
Keep everything in the boxes.
Oops. All right. Thank you again for joining us for this edition of Intermission. If you would join us for the next conversation, I'll be sitting down with costume designer Dave Macias and stage manager Cynthia Gage to review a 1995 classic horror film straight to video from Stuart Gordon, Castle Freak, starring Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton. I'm scared. All right. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next time. Until then, be good, not too good, but good enough.